Today, we're looking at one of the most unusual and revealing economic systems in the world, an economy that must seek permission from its occupier to function. In Palestine, every shipment, every movement of goods and people in Gaza and the West Bank, even receiving its own taxes, depends on approval from the same power that controls their borders, their skies, and much of their infrastructure. It's an economy both active and strangled, surviving but never sovereign. In today's episode, we look at Donald Trump's recently released Gaza peace plan as a backdrop, not to analyze its politics, but to hold it up as a mirror. The question we ask, even if such a plan were implemented, could it actually give Palestinians what they need? Or is it a continuation of the status quo, with structures of occupation that purposefully choke growth and real development? Trump's proposal envisions a special economic zone in Gaza for external investment, with negotiated tariff regimes and very conditional wording for a, quote, pathway to Palestinian self-determination, unquote. But crucially, without granting sovereignty. By the end of this episode, we aim to answer key questions such as, can an externally imposed plan meaningfully improve Palestinians' economic well-being without addressing the deeper constraints? Or is this just rebranding to return to the status quo of occupation, where Palestine's economy is dependent on Israel for its survival and only being allowed to do just that, survive? After 2 years of war and decades of occupation, we explore the mechanics of Palestine's economy. This is Business Extra, and I'm your host, Salim Essaid. We're speaking to Raja Khalidi, Director General of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute, one of the most respected voices on Palestinian development and economic sovereignty. He has over 3 decades at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, where he helped establish and lead the Program on Assistance to the Palestinian People to help shape international understanding of how occupation structures economic dependency. Raja, welcome to the program.
Nice to talk to you.
Likewise. We appreciate your time, and getting right into it, I wanted to understand from you, Palestine's economy is unique in that it must seek permission to function. Can you describe what that actually looks like on a day-to-day level to understand how that shapes everything from trade to how Palestinians can achieve a livelihood?
Yeah, the seek permission to function is very much built into the agreements that the PLO made with Israel in 1994 regarding the supposedly free functioning of the Palestinian economy. Now, that permission was granted, so to speak, in 94 and to a great extent was not in any way revoked or made conditional until the Second Intifada. So that first period of that framework, that economic framework, which is effectively a customs union, which means that we have a similar external tariff regime as Israel. We have a monetary unity with Israel, and we're supposed to have open markets with Israel. That's the premise of the agreement that was in place. Now that began, as of the Second Intifada, to be violated by different Israeli actions. So permission, if you wish, was sort of implicitly not granted any longer for Palestinian workers to enter Israel because they built a wall. Ability to, therefore, hence import and collect your own taxes, trade taxes at the borders, was also, as of 2005, revoked and was turned into an exclusively Israeli domain. Hence, this sort of gradual attrition in what was originally a 5-year, 7 interim arrangement, which was again predicated on a state at the end of it. So the prolongation of this framework amidst a deteriorating political situation in Israel, especially in the last 10 years, let's say, especially in the last 10 years, meant that this permission was more the opposite. It was that there was, to do anything, in fact, you had to now either get a permit to go to Israel, you have to go through Israeli customs and security control if you're exporting, you have to have your own customs clearance agent in Israel to do your customs clearance through Israeli ports. The central bank, the PMA, has to beg the Bank of Israel to take excess cash, Israeli cash that's circulating in the economy and that we don't need because we want dollars, and so on and so forth. Now, the war has really destroyed all of that sort of, originally contractual, but then became one-way contractual.
This is a very unique economic situation between Gaza and the West Bank. Can you describe how the physical and political separation of Gaza and the West Bank affects its economic cohesion? Like, do they work together economically?
Yeah, prior to 2023, Gaza was in 2005, before the division, before the siege, before the Israelis withdrew, before the siege, before the division, political division. Gaza was producing 34% of the Palestinian GDP, which is not bad, even though it was maybe 40% of, but we know it's a poorer part of Palestine, but it was a growing and increasingly important part of Palestinian economy. 2023, it was producing 17%. I mean, it literally at half as a result of. So the distortions that Gaza underwent already, way before the disaster of these last 2 years, was a distortion that, and again, this is the Palestinian story, when they love the word of resilience. It's so popular, and sumud. But the truth of the economic sumud, economic resilience, is, of course, the harshness of what we've been facing and the need to stay living in Palestine. So that applies to the West Bank, it applies to Gaza, it applies before the war, and it applies in the post-war or the current still phase of survival. So before the war, it was about maneuvering around these restrictions. It was about almost an organic. You cannot cut Gaza from the West Bank because they were always part of Palestine, right? Weren't they? In the same way that this idea that, for example, we've done research on the Arab-Israeli economy and the West Bank economy, and we've highlighted the extraordinary amount of cross-border organic. It's not conscious policy decisions. These are Palestinians, Israel, living in the nearby areas in Israel, coming to the West Bank to shop, to do their teeth, to go to universities, to buy property, to do tourism. So there's this organic reconnection. So can you imagine, with Gaza and West Bank as part of the same, legally speaking at least, economy, if they are, there's no issue. There's not going to be, even if we don't have a contiguity, because in a peace scenario, Trump's or anybody's, there's going to be a land link and all of that. And we had a land link in 2000. There was a land link established for about 6 months before the Intifada. And you had these convoys of people, workers coming to West Bank from Gaza, and that, of course, created its own set of problems. But anyhow, my point is that Palestinian entrepreneurs are extremely resilient. They're extremely entrepreneurial. We could teach the world about what it means to get around and survive and grow.
Well, that's what I want to ask you next. In terms of what does that actually look like? What are the added steps that they have to take to be able to do regular business as we know it?
Well, there's transaction costs for one thing. So there's an overhead that Palestinian industrialists, commercial importers, etc., pay an overhead that nobody else in the world has to pay, which are the transaction costs associated with having to take a longer road because there's roadblocks, or because of the Israeli security checks, or the extra time that is incurred and things like that. So you can imagine what that means in terms of if Palestinian trade was treated like Israeli trade, we'd be booming. Because if we can export, we're number 2 exporter, believe it or not, of majul dates in the world, the second biggest. Because these guys in 20 years established an industry which didn't exist in Palestine. In where? In the Khor, the area most threatened by Israeli settlement and annexation. So how do they do it? I don't know. I'm not a businessman. But they do it by surviving, by family solidarity, but at the same time, they live really well. We have a booming material consumption culture in lots of the West Bank. And even in Gaza before the war, there was a deeply entrenched constituency, middle and even lower class constituency for peace, not for October 7th. But the point is that in Gaza, for example, before the war, a colleague of mine did a study of Gaza industry. And he came back from there, this is 22, and he said, these guys are ready to produce high level. They had the right machinery, they had good industrial space, they have a proper workforce, and all of these things. So all I'm saying is that obviously adversity breeds excellence. So, but we're fed up of having to live under and try and do things normally and be expected to do things normally under such conditions. Hence, our ability to reach markets is limited. Right now, we should be everywhere. Palestinian products right now, and after the war with global, should be everywhere, but they're not, because we don't have that many exporters, we don't have that much easy access, and various other things you can talk about. On the other hand, we have models of industrial growth and agricultural development in the West Bank and services, high-level service, and IT, all of these sectors, and banking, which regionally are competitive. You can imagine what sort of country it would be after coming out of war and wanting to put it all behind us and rebuild. I mean, there'd been an amazing spurt that we don't need international transitional authorities. To be honest, we don't really need that much. If Gaza is going to cost $100 billion to rebuild, I promise you, we don't need more than half of that, let's say, in terms of international finance, because I promise you that the Palestinian people can rebuild it even without. We have a lot of money under the balata in this economy. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, it reminds me of Lebanon as well, like how the people there they're very resilient, they'll very innovative,
absolutely.
Right? So it's less that they need money, they just need the opportunity to be able to build themselves up. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're so well connected globally. We have everything. We're in touch with everything. We have a diaspora that we feed not enough into, but which we actually are constantly exchanging experience, capacity, capital, etc. So there is this repressed and restrained potential in Palestine that I'm looking forward to seeing, I hope, in my lifetime. But, I've been working on the Palestinian economy for over 40 years, and I've seen it at all of these different stages. It's never been so bad, and yet it's never been so potentially, we're almost there. It's like, in some ways, I feel we're in the 11th hour, both in terms of capacity, in terms of being accepted globally. Obviously, the 11th hour is going to be, we're going to be busy with Mr. Netanyahu and his folks sorting their things out. But otherwise, despite the genocide, despite all that we've lost, I don't think in the right circumstances, and the ones that we talk about with this two-state solution and the path, there's a distinct difference between the Trump vision and the Saudi-French international vision about the day after.
Yeah, let me ask you about that actually, because we'll go into like what should be done, whichever of those plans. But looking at the Trump plan, for example, with these special economic zones and investment corridors that exist, do you see that actually helping Palestinians still living under occupation? Or is it just reinforcing, rebranding of the same thing?
No, I mean, look, let's remind ourselves that this war, as far as Gaza is concerned, but even in terms of the West Bank getting up back on its feet, assuming that the worst has passed. And I'm not sure about the West Bank if that's the case, but let's assume that, like in Gaza, the worst has passed or is about to, maybe. Okay, with that sort of, from that vantage point, the immediate, and it's not just the next few months; it's the next year, through 26. Gaza is just going to be about relief and recovery from trauma. I thought. Counting the dead, mourning our dead, not rebuilding, but relief in the form of a temporary shelter, running water, and all of the other things. That's going to take months to get going properly. And I think that's an important perspective. And we shouldn't push the Palestinians too much, Saraha. And to be honest, there's no resources for reconstruction right now. But the second point about reconstruction, and again, reconstruction of Gaza or reconstitution, which is what the great program talks about. Reconstitution is making a new Gaza. Now, that doesn't mean that the idea of special economic zones, in fact, the idea that Gaza should be a tax-free, it's not new. It was, in fact, that until 1967. And we've been here, Palestine, been talking about it. Obviously, it's going to have to be. But my point is that the corridor, the nature of infrastructure, where you put it, the zoning, the spatial planning, the stages of reconstruction over 5-10 years have to be a Palestinian design, decision, and implementation. Design, decision, and implementation. And that does not mean sitting under the authority of some, okay, if the money side of things needs international oversight, fine. And if you want to give the external security of the Gaza Strip to the multinational force, I don't think anybody's going to have any problem with that. What I want to say is that this idea of the state of Palestine is now where the discussion should naturally move, since we're talking about governance. This is the moment where this recognition is not just hollow, is what I'm saying. It is hollow until we do something about it. But if we don't do anything about it, it will remain hollow. Now, what do we have to do about it? The first thing that's being done, which I think is extremely important, is they started a 3-month provisional constitutional drafting of a provisional constitution of the state of Palestine and its government. Upon which, at the moment of it, when it's adopted, presumably by the PLO Central National Council and whoever that rubber stamp might be, the point is that then we will move from this Palestinian Authority of bygone times to what this has all been about, which is the preparation of the state and the building of the institutions of the state and the electoral and democratic processes of the state. So in that sort of a scenario, in my view, the PLO becomes the leading party, the ruling party for the moment of the state. But the point is that then becomes the only legal entity to do anything in Gaza. And anything else is, I think, problematic. Things are changing and will change. And I think the war, unfortunately, has had to happen and for that to that sort of fundamental reform to under. And the reform for me is not a matter of simply corruption. That's obviously a part of it. The reform is a matter of formation of the state and of constitutional institutions and judicial institutions and democratic representation, even under occupation and without sovereignty. It's a way of organizing ourselves. Forget how much it's able to confront Israel. It's not a state which is created to confront it. It's a state which has been created to go to have peace with Israel. So all we're going to do, obviously, with this state is try to dig in, right? Until the moment where the political process allows something different.
So summarizing what you said, so it's to start off, Palestine needs statehood to be able to make its own decisions, and that has been the biggest obstacle to it being able to move forward. It's not about needing the money, it's about being able to make decisions themselves, and you said the spirit is there. Second, as you said, it's going to need a year to pick up the pieces. It's recovered from 2 years of war, it needs a year for relief and recovery. Then what comes next? Because looking long-term, if this is a long-term plan, whether from the Trump plan or, as you said, the Saudi-French, then what advice would you give to international policymakers or investors when looking for development proposals for Palestine today? What is the next necessary step?
I would say this has been the last 2 years has finally taught the world to listen to the Palestinians and to believe what we say. Okay, and we've learned to talk better, I think, in the sense that we know that it's not about the rhetoric, it's not about the rhetoric, it's about getting the truth, of course. Now, on the question of plans, we had a publication out a few months ago and had a little study day, we called it, on the reconstruction plans. And we assembled 11 plans, okay? We looked at, and not the governance ones, just the reconstruction. And we found 3 spatial plans, Palestinian, basically driven. 3 reconstruction plans, Arab, Palestinian, United Nations, which together, anybody wants to develop Gaza, start there, because we know what we want. We've studied it. We've drawn up the maps. We've discussed it among ourselves. We've got the best RAND Corporation, for Christ's sake, has a spatial plan. We don't need somebody to start again. So we need to move on that. And the same applies to reconstruction. The PA had published something a few months ago. It's now turned that into a program of action. So, I mean, we got it all. We know what we need to do. We have the mechanisms. We have the vision. I'm about to publish this week, our institute is about to publish 4 studies which talk about the economic pathway to independence and peace. And they're about how do we get to state economic relations of equality with Israel? And how do we reconstitute the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and Jerusalem as a national economy, which it's not now. So it's more managing 3 separate economic realities. So when it comes to the details of what sort of projects, etc., there's plenty of technicians out there to give good advice.
Yeah, but the overlying picture is that Palestinians can help themselves, but it's the collective consensus and pressure that we've seen, or lack of over the years, or I would say consensus for keeping things in the status quo. It seems to be changing. It goes back to the statehood thing, right? Like the pressure needs to be on Israel to basically allow Palestine to have its statehood, and without that pressure, it's not going to happen.
Absolutely. And we're not there yet. I mean, politically, there's no horizon, people will tell you, in Israel for that. My personal feeling is that things will start changing as they are in Palestine. If you've noticed, there's things going on in the Palestinian political system now. New people who have been exiled coming back, people who are now suspected of gross corruption, let's say, financial corruption. Political, I mentioned the constitutional process underway, the commitment to elections. I think in fact, to be honest, we're even Hamas and its willingness to disarm more or less and to withdraw from running Gaza. These are all amazing. The Palestinians should be congratulated in some ways for that amount of tadaruk, we say. We understand what's happened, is what I'm saying. But you don't get that feeling from the Israelis at all. Today, you caught me on a good day. So it's been a bad 2 years. I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel. And I don't think it's that long. It's not going to be another 15 years.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Business Extra from The National. Make sure to check out The National's podcasts wherever you stream. This episode was produced by our podcast editor, Raja Khalidi. Arthur Edison is our audio engineer, and I've been your host, Salim Essaid.